senior pastor here at this church, and I am so glad to welcome you here. Some of you are here regularly, because I see you on Sunday mornings. Others are visitors. You've been here perhaps before, and maybe some of you are new, and we are just so glad all of you are here together. I do want to let you know, just in case you don't know the building, that we do have restrooms, and they are on this floor. And if you need to use one, you can either go out the front door, or if you'd rather not do that during the middle of the presentation, you can just go out the back and go in the glass doors, and they can go right down the hallway. Men first, women's at the end of the hall. Okay. So before we get started, in fact, I'm going to invite Bob Norwick to come up here soon, and he's going to share a few details as well as introduce our special guest presenter. Before that, though, I would just like to open with a word of prayer. So let's pray. O great God of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we are glad to come together this evening to recognize and celebrate the history of this United Methodist Church within the Chagrin Falls community. We thank you for the small group of faithful individuals who first gathered in homes so many years ago and who then took steps to establish this church. We thank you for the past 180 years and for the many ways this church has borne witness to you within this community. We thank you, O God, for impactful ministries, for precious memories, for meaningful friendships, which were and still are a result of that witness. And now, O God, may your blessing rest upon John as he prepared to share with us what is certain to be an interesting and inspiring presentation. Amen. Okay, your turn, Bob.
Great. Hello. All right. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out this evening. It's great to see so many folks. And I want to let you know that afterward, we're going to have a reception over in Harris Hall. And you won't want to miss that because we have a number of various desserts, which I'm sure everybody's going to love, as well as a number of historical posters about the church and the Chagrin Falls Township. So you won't want to miss those. And then also, we're going to be selling Tom Matter's history of the Methodist Church in Chagrin Falls. So his book was published, and we're going to be selling that. So we'd love to have everyone pick up a copy for your coffee table. I also then would like to welcome John Borso. John and I have known each other for quite a few years. And John grew up in Chagrin Falls, and actually he grew up in this church. And John's mother was the director of Christian education, and John had to be on his P's and Q's every Sunday because of, his mom was watching over him. So, but John is the board president of the Chagrin Falls Historical Society, as well as the master of ceremonies at the Evergreen Cemetery each Memorial Day. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a warm welcome to John.
Thank you, Bob. I've been trying to think for a couple of weeks how to start this. Well, first, just let me ask you if you can see that slide clearly. Because there's going to be a number of slides, and I was a little concerned when we were looking at them this afternoon that they might not be clear enough for people that are in the back. But if you're comfortable and you can see it, that's fine. If anytime you want to move closer to see something, please feel free to do that. As Bob mentioned, I grew up in this church, and as I was doing some of the research for the history of this church that I could share with you. There's a lot of people who've written the history of this church. I mean, I probably came across 6 or 7 different renditions of the history of this church. And I'm thinking, am I just going to get up there and repeat things that everyone has said over the years? And is there something new? And the answer to that is no, there's nothing new. The history is the history. So I'm going to share pieces of the history of the church. But I'm also going to talk about some of the people. And I'm going to talk about the history of Chagrin Falls. Because you can't separate the history of this church, as well as the other churches in the valley, from the history of Chagrin Falls. So it's going to be kind of intermeshed in there, and as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some of the people. But I thought I would start with a little bit of reverence, because if I get a little emotional, if my mom could see me here, if she could see me here today, and she does. She sees me here, so I'm blessed. But this is the Bible that was given to me by my son as I evidently embarked on youth programming here. And so I'm going to read to you the inscription. I'm going to have to get my light out. As they mentioned, I'm kind of in a light. The Bible is one of the greatest blessings bestowed by God on the children of men. It is God for its author, life for its purpose, and truth for its content. We give this book to you, but it can only be yours when you read it, then dare to live it. Our best wishes to go with you in this Christian adventure. Whitfield Borso, General Superintendent, June 21st, 1953. Also signed by Reverend Dean Marston, who was the Reverend at that time. So with that, it's just kind of a mellowing out here to begin. The first slide that I have up there is one of the earliest images that we have of Chagrin Falls. It's a woodcut by a man by the name, you see his name a couple different ways. Sometimes it's Jehu, J-U-H-U, Jehu Brainerd, or John Brainerd. And the view, I'm going to use this pointer and I'll try and get it to both sides. But the view is, you see him, this is actually him in the foreground, okay, right here. And you see his name next to it, Brainerd. And the view here is that if you think about where Bentleyville Road goes across from Chagrin Boulevard to Miles Road, and you come to that area where the stop signs are, and the road goes down to one lane, that historically is known as the slide. And obviously it is a slide because the hill keeps caving in. So that's where he's sitting. Okay. Uh-oh. We didn't get very far with this one. Oh, there we go. Okay, I got it. So that's where he's sitting. And he's looking up the river. All right? So he's looking up the river. And the first thing you see here is this mill, which was the Williams Foundry. And that was actually the first mill that was, the first dam that was built in Chagrin. And I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but just to kind of show you. So you see in this, the dam for the Williams Foundry. Then you go up a little more and you see the dam for the Bullard Foundry. Then here's the falls right here. Okay? And there's actually a dam on top of the falls. And that dam provided power to mills on both sides of the falls. You can't see the dam that still exists that's in the park there, But if you go up a little further, here's the dam that was by the paper mill, up here. So you can see 5 of the 9 dams that were part of the early history of Chagrin Falls in this particular wood cut. And this dates from the 1840s. It was published in a book, How's Ohio, and it shows the early Chagrin Falls. And for our discussion tonight, you can see over here in this corner, that's the Methodist Church. Over on this side, you can see the other side of town, you can see the Congregational Church. And this building here on top of the hill is Asbury Seminary. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of those, but the early history of Chagrin is that religion was something that was very important. I was going to pull a quote from one of Tom's books, from Tom's book about school, Tom Madden, that he wrote about the schools, and a quote from Garfield, where Garfield was here in Chagrin giving a speech, and he said, this town has got it right, I'm paraphrasing here, because it understands that what's important is education and religion. And this town's got that. And education and religion were very important to the early founders of Chagrin Falls. And as all of the different histories will tell you, they started very early by meeting in people's homes. And small little groups got together, whether it was the Congregational Church, whether it was the people associated with the Methodist Church. The Free Will Baptist Church was another one that started. The Disciples Church. The Disciples Church actually was the first church in the Chagrin Valley. They were located, Adamson Bentley of Bentleyville, came here in 1831 and started a community down there about the junction of where Bentleyville Road and Miles Road are, where the bridge goes over the river. That's where Bentley settled on most of that property. And started again there with the Disciples Church and had meetings in that area down there. So that was really the first church that started in the area. Then the Methodist, the Congregationalists, and the Free Will all started their own little congregations in the 1834, 1835. They met in their homes. There was a man by the name of Charles Waldron who had a grocery store in town, and they would meet over his store. And they met in these private homes for many, many years. Again, thinking they started in 1834, 1835. Then in 1842, the trustees of the Wesley Chapel of the Methodist Church incorporated in 1842. And they built their first church. And that first church that we see here, again, over in the corner, was actually right across the street. It's right across the street from where we are. At that point in time, it was still an itinerant church. I think the title of Tom's book, if I remember right, is, Does He Have a Saddle? Does he have a horse? Does he have a horse? Yeah. If he has a horse, he's got a saddle too. Yeah, does he have a horse? Because that's one of the first things that they would ask, if someone was going to be an itinerant minister, did he have a horse? This church, the Methodist Church, was part of a circuit that included Mayfield, Gates Mills, Bainbridge, Orange, Solon, Russell. Thus, the title of Tom's book, Does He Have a Horse? Because they had to move from place to place to place. If you give me the next slide. Right, this is a little faded and a little more difficult to see, but I'm going to try and pointed out so that you can, the different aspects of it. This is where Franklin Street is here, okay? So the church, this dates from 1842, this particular map. This is one of the earliest maps of Chagrin Falls. So this is Franklin Street here, okay? Now, one of the interesting things about the early Chagrin Falls was Franklin Street was the county line in the early Chagrin Falls. So in 1838, 39, 1840, if we were sitting here at this spot, we'd be in Cuyahoga County. But across the street was Geauga County. So that's, if you look at this line, that's the old county line. So everything over here is Cuyahoga County, Orange Township and Cuyahoga County, and everything over here is Geauga County, right? So this map is again from 1842. The change was made in 1841, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But one of the interesting things I want to point out is this is Philomathian Street here, okay? And the Asbury Seminary was built here, okay? Philomathian Street, Asbury Seminary. On the old maps, you see another street here called Sophia. And all of these properties here were owned by the Methodist book, they call themselves the Methodist Book Concern, which turns out to be related to the Methodist Episcopal Church, which is what this original congregation was. And the Elizabeth Rogers, who knew Elizabeth? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about Elizabeth, but she wrote many, many letters to people to try and find out about why did the Methodist Book Concern own all this property, okay? Now, Philomathian means love of learning. Sophia, the street that goes through the middle there, means wisdom. So whether that's related to the fact that these were owned by the Methodist Church, Methodist Church Concern, the Book Concern, we don't know. It's just kind of one of those things in history. Elizabeth never got an answer why the Methodist Book Concern owned all these properties. But obviously the Methodists were a huge factor in early Chagrin. And whether or not they had other plans for this area, I don't know. But they did build Asbury Seminary right here. Okay? If you give me the next slide, please. So this map is from 1858, and here's that same area again. Okay, and you see Asbury Seminary is on this map. And go over here, Asbury Seminary. Now, interesting enough, 1858 was the last year that it was known as Asbury Seminary because it was purchased by the Board of Education. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. But the property next to the Asbury Seminary there in the corner was owned by a man by the name of A.B. Gardner. And A.B. Gardner was a real large personality in the early Methodist Church. And I'll talk about him a little bit later too, but more about him. So it's kind of interesting that he owned that property there next to the Asbury Seminary, across from all that property that was owned by the Methodist Book Concern. Now Gardner eventually moved, he built a beautiful house down Franklin Street here that still exists. If you go down Franklin Street, you have South Street on your left and Carriage Drive on your right, and there's a brick house that sits back a little bit. That was Gardner's home after he moved from this property. Right, next slide. So this is the view from the top of Grove Hill. So you can look right down the center of town here, and you can see the spire for the Methodist Church here. Again, the bridge at this point, you can see we date this from about 1870. We can tell that because of a couple different things. One is that the bridge is still 24 feet wide. That didn't get changed till in the 1880s. Another interesting building that's here, but I mean, if you like history, there's a lot. These slides are great. Okay, these are glass plate negatives. And glass plate negatives, we have a wonderful collection of glass plate negatives at the museum. And they're very highly pixelated. So when you have this on a computer, you can really zero in and see the different features of what's there. And I'm going to talk about some of it, and I know it's kind of tangential, but it is the history of Chagrin too. So hopefully I won't, if you're bored, you can leave. So this building here was originally known as Champion Hall. And that was built by a man by the name of Aristarchus Champion. And Aristarchus Champion actually was one of the largest landowners in this particular area at the very beginning when Chagrin was first settled. He owned all of the property basically that was on the west side of the county line. Okay, Aristarchus Champion. But he was very interested in, we don't know all of his motives. Some people think that he was someone who was really trying to help the community, that he liked the community. Others thought that he was just out to make money. He was a land speculator. And so he built this building as a library. It was known as Champion Library. And he donated 600 to 800 books to create this library in Chagrin Falls. But after 3 years, he pulled out and left. And the building was purchased by Charles Waldron, who was someone that was, again, I mentioned him earlier, very important in the early Methodist Church. And Champion either pulled out, there's a couple different theories, we don't know for sure. He either pulled out because there was a little downturn in the economy at that point in time, and maybe he thought he wasn't gonna, maybe he built this to make money, and he saw that it wasn't gonna make him money, and he figured that was it. The other is that he was very involved in temperance. He supported a lot of temperance organizations, and some of the individuals that were managing this property for him evidently imbibed. And when he challenged them, they said, "It's not in my contract," you know. And Chagrin went back and forth, and the Methodist Church was very involved. Temperance was an important issue, really from the outset in Chagrin, into the early 1900s, where there were large groups of people, the temperance union, the temperance ladies. Chagrin went back and forth almost sometimes from year to year, where one year they voted him dry, and the next year they voted him wet. Sometimes there were many as 18 saloons in Chagrin. So you had this tension in temperance. Of course, the Methodist Church stood on the side of no alcohol. And so they were very involved in the temperance activities. One of the great photographs that we have, and I didn't put it in this particular batch of photographs, is a picture of the hotel that was at the corner where the Key Bank is today. It was a large hotel there, and it went through a couple different renditions over time. But we have a photograph that shows all these women sitting outside of the hotel. And they were there protesting that there was alcohol being served. And supposedly they came outside and poured water and beer on these poor women sitting out there. And it's a great photograph, but it tells a story, as most of our photographs do. And again, temperance was something that it was an issue that the Methodist Church was involved in throughout its early existence, and still today. You know, you can still say that that's an issue that is important to Methodism. So, I could talk all day about some of these things, so let's go ahead to the next slide. So this is Asbury Seminary. So Asbury Seminary was originally built, it was the first, what's the word I'm looking for? They went to the state and got not a licensing, but approval to have a seminary in Chagrin Falls in 1837. And then it kind of sat there for a while. And then they actually built the building in 1843. And the first principal of the Asbury Seminary was Lorenzo D. Williams. And he was a Methodist pastor. He had a school that he ran before he was known as an educator and a teacher here in Chagrin. He had the information we have is that he had a very popular little academy that he ran on the second floor of a house over on what's now West Washington Street. But he became the first principal of the Asbury Seminary. And the early things, when you read the early histories of the Methodist Church here in Chagrin Falls, they will tell you that Asbury Seminary was a preparatory school for Allegheny College. Now, subsequent research, Elizabeth Rogers and a few others, Allegheny College cannot confirm that. They have no knowledge of this being having any kind of connection to Allegheny College. So, that was as early as some of the first history that I read, which was in 1885. They talked about this being a preparatory school. It does state in some of the news articles about it, or newspaper advertisements that from 1842 and 1843, that they really wanted people that they were going to train to be teachers. That was part of their mission. And Williams was the principal there for a number of years, but then he ended up going to Allegheny College and was there for his career. And Asbury Seminary, we have a couple good records in Tom's book, Tom Matter's book. When I say Tom, it's Tom Matter. So, in his book about the schools, he has a wonderful quote from someone which dates from about 1844, 1845, talking about what their experience was, what their courses were like, what the other students were like. It's about almost a page of quotes from a letter about what it was like to be at Asbury Seminary. So it's a really interesting read. And they functioned as a secondary school for a number of years, and then finally, when in 1849, the state of Ohio authorized local boards of education, and about 1858, the Board of Education actually bought this, and this became the Union School for Chagrin Falls schools in 1858. The next one, please. This is just another early shot. I think many people have seen this. It shows the church on the east side of the street. And again, if you envision Franklin Street here, when it was originally the county line, you can see how it divided the town. And it was a real issue. So Justice Vincent, who was one of the major players in the early Methodist Church, was also in the legislature, and in the late 1830s and 1840s. And so he made a proposition that Cuyahoga County annex 900 acres of Geauga County. And that Geauga County, in turn, would get 900 acres of Cuyahoga County. And that land swap actually occurred in 1841. We've never seen a map that shows that, because in 1843, Geauga County decided they didn't like their 900 acres, and they gave it back. So from 1841 to 1843, if you think about the eastern boundary of Cuyahoga County, it started in the north, and then it came in, and you had this 900 acres that was Geauga County, and then it bumped out into here, and you had 900 acres that was Cuyahoga County, and then the line went on down. And so what you see today, since they gave their 900 acres back, is that bump out. So if you look at the eastern border of Cuyahoga County, it comes down, and it bumps out, and comes back in. So that occurred in 1841. And it was important to the development of Chagrin Falls. Okay, the next one. So in 1884, they built this structure. So the church had been right here. So this is the corner of Washington Street, Franklin Street, okay? Here. And so this building here is where the church was. They took the top of the church off, and they built the church across the street. So the new church, go to the next slide. Okay, built in 1884, dedicated 1885. The interior, and I didn't realize this until I read this again, this interior is still, this woodwork is still pretty much the same. And this was the work of a man by the name of Harrison B. York. And Harrison B. York was an important man in the Methodist Church. But I first became acquainted with Captain York as I was doing research for the cemetery and Civil War veterans. And Harrison York joined an artillery unit in Cleveland at the outset of the Civil War, and went to training, and they made him the quartermaster sergeant because of whatever background he had, or however he presented himself, I don't know. And then after their 2 months of training, they gave the guys a pass. You know, go have a good time. Well, unfortunately, some of the guys had too good a time. It was even written up in the Plain Dealer that a number of these guys in this unit, they trashed some of the areas downtown. They went out and got drunk and just totally trashed part of downtown Cleveland. And so the next day, Harrison didn't partake in any of that. He came home and he was here with his wife, as you know, a good husband should be. So he didn't partake. So when he went back the next day, they said, you know, in essence, hello, Lieutenant York. You know, they made him lieutenant, and then they made him captain. And so he was the captain of this artillery unit that served for a number of years along the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers, and worked from a gunboat at some points, and it's just an interesting story. And then when he came back here to Chagrin, he was a woodworker and a cabinet worker. He also was a businessman, and was a big part of Chagrin Falls and a big part of this church. But this woodwork is the work of Harrison B. York. Another issue, talking about the Civil War, that was important, important and energized many people in the church, was slavery. Coming into the 1840s, 1850s, slavery split the Methodist Church. And there became a Methodist church, a Southern Methodist church. And it split the town pretty much. Although Chagrin was a town that was a strong abolitionist town. One of the blessings that we have at the Historical Society is we have quite a few letters and diaries from people who lived here in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. So we can really understand some of the feelings that they had. And I mentioned Justice Vincent and A.B. Gardner. They were strong abolitionists. And there's some belief that Justice Vincent, his home may have been on the Underground Railroad. Justice Vincent and A.B. Gardner, there was a publication called the Anti-Slavery Bugle that came out of Lisbon, Ohio. And there were about 20 different businessmen from Chagrin that were sponsors of that newspaper, including Vincent and Gardner. Vincent's house is the house that, if you think about when you go on Cleveland Street and you turn into Hamlet Hills, there's a beautiful white Federal-style house on the left. The Miller family lives there today. That was built by Justice Vincent. Again, he's the man that was in the legislature. He's the one that's responsible for changing the county line. He was very much a part of this church and its early organization. He was a doctor by trade, but we don't have any direct documentation that the house was used to house runaway slaves as part of the Underground Railroad. But there's good circumstantial evidence, and everybody that has lived there says it was. So, yeah, so it must be so. The only direct documentation that we have of individuals that were supporting the Underground Railroad by housing slaves is the Church family. Henry Church Sr., who lived on what's now West Orange Street. And in the diaries of both Jane Church and their son Austin Church, they talk about housing slaves and when slaves came through. And actually at one point, Henry Church found out that one of the slaves that came through was a slave of Henry Clay, who was one of the, in Kentucky, one of the major backers behind the fugitive slave law. And so Henry Church actually wrote him a letter and said, I can't remember the guy's name. I want to tell you that George was here the other night. We forgot to tell anybody. So he's in Canada now. Kind of obviously a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, or in your face kind of a thing. But Austin Church talked about in his diary that they knew when there was a slave in the house because they would come to eat breakfast and there would be less food for everybody because it was being shared. All right, we got another picture of the church. Just another view of the church. The church was a very interesting architectural, important feature of Chagrin Falls. And one of the entrepreneurs in Chagrin Falls was a man named Kenny. And Kenny's motto for his store was, Kenny sells everything, okay? But one of the things that he did was he created, if you go to the next slide, he created things like this. All right, go on to the next one. He actually had these made in Germany. So he would send these images and have these plates made. And so there are plates like this from Kenny's store. This is the late 1880s, 1890s. There are plates like this from Kenny's store showing different scenes around Chagrin. But obviously the Methodist Church was one that was important. And so you had this scene of the Methodist Church. Kenny's store was located, if you've been downtown Chagrin lately, there's a building known as the Campaign Building where they're working on the front of the building and they have all the scaffolding there. If you're looking down the river, the popcorn shop is on the right, and there's the driveway that goes back to the parking lot, and then the building on the left is the Campaign Building. That was the second building that Tennant built. He built a wooden structure there in 1878, and then he built the building that's there now in the 1890s. Next slide. So these are some of the important people in the Methodist Church. And I just want to point out a few of them. This is Harrison B. York that we talked about. The man who created this beautiful woodwork in here. I don't know the date of this. I'm thinking that this is maybe after this structure was built, so maybe the mid-1880s. There's nothing that dates this particular photograph. This man here, interestingly enough, he looks like a boy with a goatee. I mean, he looks very young in this particular photograph. But that's Westall Hunt. And Westall Hunt actually grew up in South Russell. But he always considered himself a Chagrin boy. And as many people, Chagrin was the central cultural area for everyone around here. So when we look at the boys that went off to fight in the Civil War, like Westall Hunt, who was in the 7th Ohio Volunteer Cavalry, you know, when he said, "Where are you from?" he said, "I'm from Chagrin," even though he lived in South Russell. But every day, Westall Hunt wrote a letter to his wife. Every day, talking about what happened today. You know, whether it was Gettysburg, whether it was Lookout Mountain, you know, for 3 years, and then he re-upped and was in the 5th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He wrote a letter to his wife. And we have copies of those letters. It's a bound book this thick on both sides, typed on both sides, of these letters where he talks about his experiences in the Civil War. It's just an incredible, incredible document. And Westall Hunt ended up purchasing the home up on Grove Hill that was built by Noah Graves. A beautiful home. There's a picture in the newspaper of his 50th anniversary with his wife, and they're all out in front of the home. And if you know the home, it's got a nice tower in the front. I'm blocking. It's owned by the Mihalik family now. And they kind of treasure the fact that this is one of the original homes in Chagrin Falls, again, built by Noah Graves and the different families that live there. So Westall Hunt, and then we have J.M. Gates. He was a mill owner, Gates Mills, and mills in Bedford, Chagrin Falls, and what became Gates Mills. He built what is now Village Hall. That was his home. Also in here we have W.A. Upham over here. He was another businessman. He had a large lumber mill that was located where the library is today. He had a lot of property. A lot of the homes, as you go up North Street from East Orange Street, were built by Upham. And he built them for his workers and on speculation. There are probably 5 or 6 homes going up in that area that Upham built for speculation. So then we have I know he's in it, I'm just trying to, it's hard to read it there. Well, let me go here to O.F. Fraser. Okay, O.F. Fraser here. So that's this guy here, O.F. Fraser. He was a druggist, and he built a beautiful home in the Queen Anne style that most of you looking out there have been here a while, so you know where the old post office is. That was built by the WPA in 1938. Well, that's where Fraser built his house. But then when the WPA came in and they decided they were going to put a post office there, they moved his house and they moved it over. It's right next to what is now the Christian Science Church. That beautiful kind of beige green with all the different wonderful Queen Anne style woodwork, was Fraser's house. And it's kind of ironic that would be there, and because that goes to another story about the churches here. That site is actually the site where the Disciples Church was. And the Disciples Church, as I mentioned before, started down in Bentleyville. Well, in 1850, they decided they're going to build a church here in Chagrin Falls. Well, the Methodists and the Congregationalists, they weren't real excited about that, okay? Garfield actually helped build that church, and they built it in that spot that I'm referring to, right next to where the Christian Scientist Church is now. So they built it close to this church. So Fraser was probably one of the people that wasn't happy about that church being there. So I think he'd be happy to know that his house is sitting where that church was at some point. Okay, here's what I'm looking for. I don't know why I missed him because he's right in the middle. This guy right here. That's A.D. Gardner. So we talked about him. Abolitionist, very wealthy businessman. These were all people that formed the Methodist Church and formed Chagrin Falls. Again, you can't separate the development of the churches from the development of Chagrin Falls. So if you're on the next one, this is one I know you've all seen. It's just a fun picture showing the Methodist Church and people out for a Sunday sleigh ride. And it was something that all the churches participated in, the Sunday sleigh ride. This one just happens to be in front of the Methodist Church. The next one. This is another gathering. This is Victory Day, November 11th, 1918. And you can see the church in the background. We have a number of photographs showing all of the different parades and things that occurred on Victory Day, November 11th. Next one. Okay, now we're jumping way ahead. So now we're talking into the 1950s. Now the reason I'm going to talk about this a little bit is that, this is my era in the church. You look there left to right, if you can read the names, you have C.S. Harris, Fred Lauderer. We don't know who this guy is, if anybody knows. Jim Early, Madeline Wade. All people that were very instrumental in this church during that period of time. And so this is leading up. It looks, when you see this picture, it's kind of hard to tell, but they're singing something. Fred Lauderer was the mayor of Chagrin for many, many years. Jim Early was a family friend for years, and we used to vacation as kids with the families. We would go different places around the country and vacation together as families during this period of time in the 50s, early 50s. But again, all people that played an important role in the development of this church. The next one. So this is the building of Harris Hall. And the view that you have here, it's kind of hard to tell, but you're actually at the police station looking due east. So this is the back wall. You can see the church over here on this side. You can see this tire company here, okay? Back wall, church, tire company. And the thing that, the memory that this brings back to me is that, again, this is I was probably 8 or 9, and new construction was like a gym. Wherever there was new construction in Chagrin, we found it. I can remember when the house was built on the corner of Maple and Franklin Street, and we'd get up there and run through the trusses, and when it was being built. I mean, it was just great to explore the new construction. And there was I remember there were 3 houses that were built on South Street, across the roller rink there, back in the 50s. Again, we just would go out there and have the greatest time. So this was a big gym, and we just had a lot of fun exploring this construction. And I can remember walking on the steel trusses, going across them. But the story I'm going to tell you is, I kind of debated whether I'd tell you this story, but so up here in the front, you think about the entrance and exit, that's over there near Lowe's TV, the one near the front, where when they were building this, you could get underneath that stairwell. And so we would, and as you got underneath there, it was dark and it turned pitch black, but there was a little metal truss that ran along just about sitting height. And so we would go underneath there and we would scoot along this little truss and then make the turn, which was where the doorway was above us. And just and what we would do is we'd go over to Standard Drug and we'd purloin some Hershey bars. And then we'd come back and we'd go underneath and we'd eat those. Okay? That was kind of our little thing to do. And so this one time, we're going along there, it's pitch black, and we turn that little corner, and I'm scooting along, feeling my way, and I feel some fur. And I was gone. We were out of it, and for all I know, my Hershey bar is still over there, underneath that stairwell. But that's my memory of that growing up. Next slide. So there it is completed. The Harris family has been a blessing to this church in many ways, and many ways they've been a blessing to the whole community. And this is just one example of how they have supported the church that was important to them, as well as the community at large. When you think of Harris Stadium, the lights there were given by the Harris family. When I was a kid growing up, they were benefactors in many different ways. So we're thankful for the Harris family. And if we do the next one, so this is the addition that was put on in the late 1978, 1980, that area out there. And I'm not going to dwell on this a little bit very much, but it's interesting. It's a beautiful addition. This was probably what did Elizabeth Rogers in, if you remember Elizabeth Rogers. In 1978, the Historical Society in Chagrin petitioned the National Park Service to create a historic district. And so this structure was a contributing structure because of its architecture. Primarily, in fact, in the citation, it talks about the architecture as being so important. And if you saw the article in the newspaper last week, it talked about this church being on the National Register of Historic Places. Well, it was for 3 years. And what happened was they built this new front on it. And so you no longer had that Gothic entrance. And so they took away that historic designation because it was gone. And this was Elizabeth. We have, by the way, I should tell you that there's a rumor that every year we have spirits alive up at the cemetery, and there's a rumor that Elizabeth may show up. So that's October 15th and 16th. You can buy tickets at the Historical Society or online. And Elizabeth isn't buried out there. But Miriam Church is going to be showing up. And they were like oil and water back in the 70s and 80s. But we have in our files the letters that Elizabeth wrote to Reverend Cote, to the Methodist, whatever central organization, about the terrible thing that they're doing to this church. Obviously this has worked for the church. It changed its historical designation. I think Elizabeth was really probably the only person that really objected real seriously to it. I mean, other people may not have liked it, but so one of the things that she did was that she asked for all of her donations back. She'd been a member of the church at that point for over 50 years. No, it didn't work. It didn't work. Next slide. So there it is, finished. Sorry about the smear. I don't know what that is in that photograph. And I know we've got a better one somewhere, but I couldn't find it. The finished product. The next one, just a view showing both Harris Hall and the new addition on the front. And the next one, yes, okay, so I thought I'd include this. This is actually my age group. Going at I don't know if it's a Bible study or what it is. It's interesting, this is Jim Miles. This is Richard Page. Jim Miles, Richard Page, Randy Ayers, Kurt Lauder, Doc Jones. Okay. And one of the interesting things about, as I went through a lot of the photographs that we have, particularly the photographs from the 50s and the 60s, one of the constants in those photographs is Ralph Beatty. I mean, Ralph loved this church. He was here volunteering in so many different ways. And the Beatty family has revered this church. And again, given, like the Harris family, in some ways the same ways, but in other ways, very spiritual, giving family. And I remember the Beatties from my time in the church. I'm not in that photograph, And the reason was, and I will be honest with you, the Federated Church Youth Group had a basketball team called the Green Deacons. And you had to go to their youth group if you wanted to play on the Green Deacons. So I played on the Green Deacons. And then my next slide. So I want to end with this. Tom loved this church, and his book tells a lot of interesting stories about the history of this church, little vignettes. I really encourage you to get it, enjoy it. There were a lot of the stories that he tells in his book that I kind of wanted to tell, but I thought we'll leave those for Tom's book. One of the interesting things I'll share about Tom is that when he moved here from Waldron, Ohio, they were Lutheran. And there wasn't a Lutheran church in Chagrin. And so they became active here. And of course, Tom was here 67 years, and he loved this church. His father loved this church. The family, this church loved him. And that's why he loved this church. Tom has just been such a good friend for so many years, as is Linda. And originally he thought that no one cared about his book. And so I'm very grateful that it's been published and we have an opportunity to share his work. He was a great historian and a great researcher. So that's my program.
Thank you very much, John, for a great program. And everybody, please join us over in Harris Hall for some refreshments, and we can chat with John. So look forward to seeing you all next door. Thank you very much.
Yes.